Everyone, welcome to section 4.1. In this unit we're talking rational and radical relationships, and we're going to be graphing radical functions today. So I'm going to break this down into two videos for you. Okay, so we're going to graph the equation y equals the square root of x by creating a table. I've actually already shown the graph right here, and this is what we call the parent function. It's the simplest function of any function which has not been translated in any way. So here's what the graph looks like. So we can actually start with the domain and range. Okay, so domain is simply all the possible x values that you can use, everything that works. So graphically you can look at this and say, well, here's my graph, and it stops at the origin. There's no x values to the left, there's no graph. And so what that means, x has to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, in interval notation you can write that from 0 to infinity. Now let's take a look at the y-axis, or the y values. The y values are vertical, and notice that there's no red graph below the x-axis. That means with the range has to be values that are also greater than or equal to 0, but we're talking the y values here because it's a range. You can also write that as 0 to infinity. So in this case we have the same domain and range. Now to create a table we can pick any x value that's in the domain. Okay, so I make a t-chart and let's just pick a few values. Let's do like -4, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 4. Okay, those are the values I'm going to plug in for x. Now notice the first one when I have -4. If I plug -4 in under the square root, I get -2, or excuse me, just 2i. Okay, the square root of 4 is 2, but this is negative, so it's imaginary. The solution is imaginary. If I plug -1 in for x, I get the square root of -1, and that's just I. Okay, these values you cannot use because they're not in the domain. We can't graph them on the xy plane in the real number, so they don't work. So let's pick a value that does work, 0. So the square root of 0 is just 0. So the first ordered pair you plot is when x is 0, y is 0 right there. Next, 1. The square root of 1 is just 1. So the next point we plot is 1, 1. So I go 1 over, 1 up, there we go. Okay, and now when we do like square root of 2. Now the square root of 2 is not a perfect square, so it's approximately 1.41. So yes, you can pick any x values that are in the domain, but you want to pick ones that make sense. 1.41 is going to be hard to plot, so I'm going to pick 4. That's my next value. So I'm not actually going to plot this point. I'm going to pick 4, the square root of 4 is equal to 2. So my next point is 4, 2. And notice if you go all the way out to 9, the square root of 9 is 3. So there is how we draw that graph. Okay. You can also confirm on your calculator if you hit y equals. Okay. And you notice here you see the square root button, and we can zoom in on that. Okay. So let's go ahead and zoom in. And so I go ahead and click that. There's the square root button. So I can hit second square root or second x squared to get that blue feature. Okay, and I can just hit, well, it didn't show up there, second, there we go, and square root, and we hit x and close off that parenthesis, and you can hit graph, and you're going to see that nice graph that we have here. There's our graph. And if you go to second table, you can see the values that don't work. Notice how if I go into negatives, there's an error because you can't put a negative under the square root. So that's an introduction to graphing by tables. We're going to go ahead and do a few more examples, but I just wanted to make this quick introduction video. So if you have any questions or comments, you can type them below, and we'll see you next time.